On a night when Chicago froze to a standstill, Captain Jack Turner found a dying bobcat kitten, shivering, wild, and alone, at the firehouse door. In that moment, one rule could save his job, but breaking it might save a life. When the
Hey
world
there, little
demands you turn
guy.
away, would you risk everything for a wild
You
heartbeat?
must be freezing.
Where are you watching from? If you believe every act of compassion matters, like and subscribe for more true stories of courage and second chances. Chicago doesn't sleep when the blizzards come. It just groans under the weight, pushing on, fighting to survive the long,
It's running,
razor-edged
but I'm
nights.
not sure for how long.
That winter, the wind was merciless, shrieking through alleys and battering at the boarded-up windows along West Monroe. Snowdrifts the size of cars made the streets vanish, and the street lamps threw trembling yellow halos onto a world turned white and silent. On a night when the temperature dropped to 15 degrees, when even the L trains seemed to freeze mid-curve, Captain Jack Turner stood outside the battered brick firehouse of Station 27, staring down a city that felt as if it might never thaw. He pulled his coat tighter, the cold biting through his layers, and stepped onto the creaking stoop to check the generator humming by the door. The city was buried, and power flickered on and off all over the block. Station 27 was supposed to be a beacon, ready for the next 3-alarm call, the next ambulance screaming through the snow. Jack's boots crunched through an inch of fresh powder as he rounded the generator, his breath fogging up around his stubbled jaw. That's when he saw it. A small, shadowy lump was huddled against the firehouse door, nearly invisible against the dirty snow, no bigger than a football, fur stiff and bristling with ice. For a split second, Jack thought it was trash, maybe some tattered coat or a forgotten glove blown by the wind. But the shape didn't move, didn't flinch as he drew near. He knelt down, expecting to find a stray cat frozen in the storm, and reached out a cautious hand. His fingers brushed against something softer than he expected, wet fur crusted in ice. Underneath, skin and bones, shivering so hard it felt like the heartbeat of a bird. The creature was so cold, Jack almost jerked his hand away, the chill crawling up his wrist. He leaned in closer, brushing away some snow, and saw a faint breath fogging from a tiny mouth. The eyes, half closed and glassy, blinked once, slow and wild. It wasn't a house cat at all. There were faint, shadowy spots on its back, the ears tufted, the face fierce even in its weakness. A bobcat kitten, maybe a few months old at most. So young, its paws barely stuck out of the heap of fur. How in God's name had it gotten here, in the dead of a Chicago winter, miles from the edge of the forest preserves? Had it wandered in from the train yards? Had it followed the river, lost and starving, until it collapsed at the nearest glow of warmth and diesel fuel? Jack glanced back at the firehouse. Warm light spilled out of the common room windows. The other firefighters were just inside. Lenny making soup, Red watching the news, someone's radio quietly humming Christmas carols in defiance of the storm. He looked down at the kitten again. Its breathing was shallow, ribs fluttering, mouth barely parting in a silent hiss. If he left it out here, the snow would cover it by morning. If he tried to help it, he'd be breaking the law. Bobcats were protected. Wildlife officials would want to know. Bringing a wild animal inside, even just to warm up, could mean fines. Maybe even his job if word got around. And yet, Jack saw something desperate in the kitten's half-open eyes. A wildness, yes, but also a plea, as if it knew there was one last chance between life and oblivion, and he was standing right on that knife's edge. The storm howled louder, sending a sheet of snow swirling across the street. Jack hesitated for just a second. He could almost hear his late father's voice. Old Captain Turner, hero of 3 city fires, stubborn as hell. A good man knows when rules matter and when they don't. Jack Turner had broken rules before to save a life. He figured he could break one more. He slid his arms under the kitten, wincing as the icy fur clung to his gloves. The little body weighed almost nothing, limp as a rag doll. But when he lifted it, the kitten gave a sudden, feeble growl. That low, fierce sound, barely more than a whisper, surprised him. There was still fight left in this one. Still something wild, stubborn, unbroken. Cradling the kitten against his chest, Jack hurried back inside, heart pounding, feeling like he was smuggling something precious and dangerous. He shut the door behind him with his boot and ducked into the hallway, avoiding the kitchen where the others would see. He paused by the battered old first aid cabinet, fumbling for blankets and a hot water bottle. Every minute counted. The cold had seeped so deep, the kitten's whiskers were frosted. As he wrapped the tiny animal up in a faded firehouse towel, Jack's hands shook, not just from the cold, but from the weight of the choice he'd just made. He risked a glance down the hall. Lenny called, "You out there freezing your ass off, Cap?" Jack grunted back, voice steady, and slipped into the old storage room where it was quiet and dark. Laying the kitten on a bed of towels, he watched its sides flutter. If he leaves it, it dies. If he saves it, he risks everything. In that instant, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside Jack Turner's heart. A battle between duty and mercy, law and loyalty. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere a siren wailed in the distance, the city calling out for help as it always did. But in that silent, dim-lit storage room, Jack faced a choice that would tie his fate to a wild, fragile life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And as the kitten let out a tiny, defiant snarl, Jack knew this was only the beginning. Inside the battered old storage room of Station 27, the silence was so deep Jack Turner could hear the steady, faint rasp of the kitten's breath beneath the thick towels. The heat from the small space heater seemed feeble compared to the cold that had soaked into the little bobcat's bones. Jack checked the animal over with a steady hand, recalling lessons from a dozen rescues past. Dogs from burning buildings, cats shivering behind dumpsters, even a raccoon once dragged from a collapsed porch. But this was different. This one was wild, untamable, and protected by laws meant to keep its kind apart from people. Every few minutes, Jack's mind flickered with the risks. Chicago's animal control was strict, especially with exotics. Bobcats didn't belong in apartments, much less in a firehouse, not even for a night. He'd seen the headlines, penalties, lost jobs, even legal charges for interfering with wildlife. Yet as the kitten curled tighter, a shiver running through its small frame, the notion of turning away from this life felt impossible. The city outside raged on. Sirens rose and fell, echoing through alleys and across frozen yards, each one a reminder of duty. In the common room, the others had noticed Jack's absence. He could hear boots clumping in the hallway, Lenny's booming laugh, Red's low muttering. For now, though, no one opened the storage room door. The secret was his alone. Jack moved quickly, pulling out his battered phone and searching for emergency veterinarians. Most lines rang to voicemail, closed, stranded, unable to reach the city in the storm. Finally, he reached an all-night clinic on the west side. He pressed the phone between shoulder and ear, cradling the kitten as he explained, voice low, the symptoms and the situation. He didn't mention bobcat. He called it a kitten found outside, nearly frozen, hoping that help would come before questions. He assembled a makeshift recovery station in the firehouse's quietest corner, towels stacked like a nest, a battered first aid kit open, bottled water, and a little raw chicken filched from the kitchen fridge. He watched as the kitten slowly opened its eyes, pupils wide and wild, the gold flecks in its irises catching the lamplight. The animal's instincts ran deep. Even as it shivered with weakness, its mouth parted in a low, breathy growl. A warning. Stay back. I'm not yours. Jack respected that. He knew what it was to be pushed to the edge and still refuse to give up. He kept his movements gentle, his voice a low rumble, talking less to soothe the animal and more to steady his own nerves. Hours crept by. The city outside was swallowed in ice and darkness, and the other firefighters came and went, never guessing what was unfolding just beyond the corridor's reach. When the storm howled its fiercest, Jack left the kitten bundled and checked in with his crew. Lenny shot him a suspicious glance but said nothing. They all had secrets, Jack thought, but few were as wild or as fragile as this one. Returning, he found the kitten curled tight, its breathing steadier, eyes watching every movement. That stubborn will to live radiated off the animal, a flicker of wildness that made Jack's chest ache. He watched it for a long time, the snow piling higher against the firehouse walls, and thought of all the ways this could go wrong. And yet, in the dim light, a decision formed. A quiet vow. If the city's laws could not find mercy for a dying creature, then Jack would make mercy his law. He reached into the towels and, for the first time, gently stroked the kitten's head. The fur was soft beneath the crust of ice, and for a second, the animal froze. It did not bite. It did not run. Its eyes flickered with confusion and perhaps a flicker of trust. Jack smiled, a slow, tired smile. Ash, he said quietly. The name came to him as naturally as breath. Ash, gray and wild, born of fire and cold, survivor of storms. You'll make it, kid. From that moment on, their fates were tangled, bound together by a choice that could not be undone. Jack moved the kitten closer to the heater and set up a rotation with the other firefighters. Checking the pipes, he told them, making sure nothing freezes up. He slipped away every hour, tending to Ash, feeding it tiny pieces of meat, and talking softly in the dark. The bond grew. Ash's growls softened to low purrs. Eyes alert but less wary. There were setbacks. One morning, Jack found Ash splayed across the towels, breathing hard, a patch of blood on its paw where it had gnawed at an old wound. Panic surged, but Jack improvised, bandaging the paw and calling the vet again, his own hands trembling with frustration and fear. Days bled into weeks. The firehouse survived the storm. The city slowly thawed, the snow receding, revealing the battered, salt-stained bones of Chicago beneath. Through it all, Ash grew stronger. Jack, for his part, learned to live with the gnawing worry that each footstep in the hallway might bring discovery, a supervisor, an inspector, or worse. Yet every time Ash's gold eyes met his, Jack felt a quiet certainty. Some rules are made to be broken. Some wild things are meant to be saved, no matter the cost. And so, in the battered heart of Station 27, with winter howling outside, Jack Turner and Ash the bobcat began a strange, dangerous partnership, one forged in secrecy, bound by survival, and destined to change both their lives forever. As the weeks slipped by, the world outside the firehouse thawed into a muddy, gray Chicago spring. The ice that had buried the city melted into puddles that reflected tired skyscrapers and graffiti-tagged alleys. Within Station 27, life returned to a restless rhythm, alarms blaring in the middle of the night, boots pounding the hallways, the smell of chili simmering on the stove. For Jack Turner, each day was balanced between duty and secret, between fighting fires and caring for Ash, the wild bobcat kitten who'd come to symbolize a promise he couldn't abandon. Ash, once barely clinging to life, recovered faster than Jack had dared hope. The frostbitten pads on its paws healed, the patchy fur grew thick and shining, and its small body put on weight. In the beginning, Ash slept for hours curled in a makeshift nest under a desk in the storage room. Jack fed it scraps, always careful not to let the others see. For a time, the world inside that small, hidden space felt almost peaceful. But wildness, Jack knew, wasn't something that could be tamed by kindness alone. As Ash grew stronger, it began to test the boundaries of its cage. First, it pawed at the edges of its crate, then leapt to the top of a file cabinet, perching with the confidence of a rooftop cat surveying the city. Jack tried to give it stimulation, scraps of leather to claw, cardboard boxes to shred, a length of rope knotted for tugging. But it wasn't enough. Soon, the bobcat scaled the firehouse's battered furniture, leaping from desk to shelf, leaving scratch marks like signatures wherever it landed. The firehouse itself, never a quiet place, now had a wild heartbeat pulsing in its shadows. Sometimes, in the early morning hours, Jack caught Ash perched on the windowsill, eyes locked on the shifting city lights outside, tail twitching. Other times, a low growl echoed down the hallways when a firefighter came too close to the storage room door. Red joked that the place was haunted. Lenny muttered about rats the size of dogs. No one guessed the truth, but Jack felt the tension rising. Secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer you carry them. The real trouble began one stormy afternoon when Station 27 responded to a 3-alarm blaze in a row of old brick walk-ups off Pulaski Road. Jack was already on edge. His mind tugged between the demands of the job and the gnawing worry about Ash. He'd left the bobcat secured in its reinforced cage, hidden behind stacks of supply boxes, with just enough food and water to last the night. The wind outside whipped snow into angry spirals, turning the fire into a monster that seemed to roar and breathe with each new gust. The crew fought the blaze for hours, battered by wind and smoke, crawling through rooms where ceilings threatened to collapse. The radios crackled, orders barked through static, sweat and ash streaking every face. Jack worked on instinct, directing his team, his mind dividing itself in two. One half calculating escape routes, the other silently counting the hours until he could return to check on Ash. Finally, the flames surrendered, leaving behind only ruin and smoldering rubble. Exhausted and reeking of smoke, Jack returned to Station 27, eager for nothing more than a shower and a hot drink. He opened the storage room door, expecting to see Ash curled asleep in its cage. Instead, the cage door was open. The bedding was torn, water spilled, and the faint scent of wild animal was sharper, more desperate. Panic flared in Jack's chest. He scanned the room, then the hallway. No sign of the bobcat. Somewhere in the chaos of their departure, Ash had slipped free, pushed by hunger or boredom or simply the untamable urge to escape. He raced through the firehouse, heart pounding, scanning corners, peering under tables and behind the boiler. Outside, the storm had thickened. Snow fell in heavy sheets, muffling sound, turning the city into a white labyrinth. Jack's boots left muddy prints as he searched the alley, calling softly, but Ash was nowhere to be seen. Fear churned in his gut. He pictured the worst, Ash running through the snow, disoriented and starving, Ash darting into traffic or being spotted by a neighbor and reported to animal control. The city was no place for a wild thing, especially not tonight. Then the fire alarm blared. A new call, a new emergency. Jack had no choice. Duty pulled him away, back into his turnout gear, back into the freezing streets, even as his mind stayed fixed on the missing kitten. That night, fate twisted the knife. While battling the fire at a crumbling apartment building, Jack's radio crackled with confusion. Someone had seen a small animal streaking through the smoke. He knew instantly, Ash. Driven by panic and loyalty, the bobcat had slipped into the heart of chaos, guided not by sense but by a primal tether, a bond forged in frost and secrecy. In that split second, Jack faced a terrible choice. Let Ash go and protect his secret, or risk everything, his safety, his job, maybe his freedom, to chase after the wild thing he had come to love. The false peace of the past weeks shattered. He stepped forward into the burning, choked air. The line between man and wild drawn in ash and flame. This was no longer just about mercy or survival. It was about loyalty, a promise he could not break, even if it meant risking everything. Smoke hung thick in the air as Jack Turner pressed his mask tighter and ducked beneath a sagging doorframe. Every instinct screamed at him to focus on his crew and the terrified tenants stumbling out into the snow, faces streaked with soot and panic. But over the roar of the flames and the chaos of the fireground, something else pulled at him. A thread of worry sharper than any alarm bell. Ash was out here somewhere, alone in the inferno, wild and afraid. Jack moved through the choking blackness, flashlight beam jittering across warped linoleum and peeling wallpaper, boots sliding on puddles that hissed as water met smoldering embers. He'd learned over years of fighting fire that every disaster holds its own secrets. Sometimes you find them in the last place you look. He swept his beam into a scorched hallway, past an overturned stroller and scattered toys, ignoring the clatter of footsteps on the stairs behind him. A low, guttural sound echoed from ahead, distinct, raw, and wild, not a human voice. Jack's heart lurched. He followed the sound, moving deeper, coughing as acrid smoke clawed at his lungs. On the far side of a buckled kitchen, crouched at the base of a scorched pantry door, was Ash. The bobcat's small body was silhouetted against a wall of flames, fur singed, ears flattened in defiance. It was growling, a thin, ragged sound that cut through the confusion like a warning. Jack stopped short, fear for the animal warring with fear for himself, for the family he was supposed to be rescuing, for the risk of discovery. Yet even here, Ash's golden eyes were fierce with purpose, not panic. In the seconds that followed, Jack understood. Ash wasn't trying to escape. The kitten was facing the door, claws digging into the wood, tail flicking in agitation. Beyond that door, Jack heard a faint thump, so soft he might have missed it. Someone was trapped. He lunged forward, yanking open the scorched door as the flames licked closer, his gloves sticking to the hot metal. Inside, a woman huddled with two small children, eyes wide with terror. They'd taken shelter in the pantry, missed by the initial sweep of firefighters. Ash had found them, sensing life behind the walls, refusing to leave until help arrived. There was no time to marvel. Jack barked for backup through his radio, but the smoke swallowed his words. He grabbed the woman by the arm, urged the children to cling to his coat, and led them out the way he'd come. Ash followed, not running, but herding, moving between Jack and the wall of fire, as if determined to guide them all through. The group stumbled over fallen beams, splashed through pools of dirty water, and burst out into the hallway, where a fresh wave of cold air stung their faces. Other firefighters surged forward, sweeping up the rescued family, calling out questions. For a moment, in the swirl of relief and confusion, no one noticed the bobcat by Jack's side. But Ash was too wild, too visible to disappear for long. A young paramedic let out a gasp. "Is that a—" But Jack was already ushering Ash away, back through the smoke and into the ruined building's shadows, adrenaline crackling in his veins. By the time the last flames were knocked down and the crew gathered in the icy street, rumors buzzed like static. Some kind of animal in there. Saw it with the captain. Dragged a family right out of the fire. The truth, as always, grew stranger in the telling. By sunrise, local reporters were calling Station 27. Someone snapped a photo, blurry but unmistakable. Jack Turner and a wild bobcat emerging from a burning building, faces masked, eyes shining. Within hours, headlines screamed across the city. "Bobcat saves family in West Side fire." Some called Ash a hero, others a menace. Comment sections filled with praise, outrage, and speculation. Wildlife officials took notice, issuing stern warnings about public safety and the dangers of keeping wild animals in city limits. The phone at Station 27 rang with more questions than Jack could answer. His fellow firefighters watched him with new eyes, some with awe, some with suspicion. Jack felt the pressure building. He'd crossed a line, and the city had seen. Ash had saved lives, but also shattered boundaries. Now, authorities wanted answers. Was the bobcat an asset, a threat, a miracle, or a scandal? Jack tried to focus on the job, on drills, on fire inspections, on the endless cycle of alarms, but everywhere he turned, the shadow of Ash followed him. He saw it in the wary glances of his crew, the whispers in the locker room, the questions from city officials that grew sharper with every day the story stayed in the news. At home, he watched Ash pacing restlessly at the windows, yearning for the wild, and yet somehow bound to him. Their partnership, forged in secrecy and necessity, had exploded into the public eye. Now, for the first time, Jack realized how fragile it all was. He wasn't sure if he could protect Ash from a world that wanted to turn the bobcat into a symbol, either of danger or of hope. The city was divided. To some, they were heroes. To others, lawbreakers. Jack knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. And as snow began to fall again, thick and silent over the city, he braced himself for the storm to come. One that would test not only his loyalty, but the very meaning of courage and wildness in a world ruled by fear and wonder. The news cycle moved fast in Chicago, but not fast enough to outrun a story this wild. Within days, every local station and city paper ran a different angle on the bobcat rescue. Headlines blared from corner newsstands and phone screens. Chicago's wild hero, bobcat rescues family. Firehouse outlaw, Captain Turner's secret. TV vans camped outside Station 27. Neighbors dropped off casseroles, notes of thanks, or angry letters, depending on which rumors they believed. Jack Turner became a minor celebrity overnight. and not the kind any firefighter wanted to be. Inside the firehouse, the mood shifted from awe to anxiety. The walls that had protected Jack and Ash now seemed thin as paper. Every knock at the door made his shoulders tense. Some of the crew started avoiding him, whispering in corners, careful not to get caught in the fallout. Others, like Red and Lenny, offered silent solidarity, a nod in the hallway, a warm mug left by his desk. But even their support was tinged with worry. Jack tried to stay ahead of the chaos. He scrubbed Ash's scent from the storage room, reinforced the windows, and limited Ash's time indoors. At night, he'd let the bobcat slip out into the walled courtyard behind the firehouse, watching as the wild cat stretched, leapt, and vanished into the tangle of shadows and wind. Sometimes Ash returned at dawn, fur dusted with grit, and eyes burning with restless intelligence. Other times, Jack waited and worried, wondering if this would be the day Ash didn't come back. It didn't take long for the city to act. The phone rang off the hook with calls from City Hall, the Wildlife Commission, and the press. Jack was summoned to a meeting with his district chief, an uncomfortable hour spent defending his choices under the hard fluorescent lights of a cramped office. He listened to stern lectures about protocol, public safety, and liability. Bobcats were not meant to be kept, trained, or housed. They were protected wildlife. Even a temporary rescue, he was reminded, could be considered illegal. But Jack had seen something in Ash, something that went beyond mere survival or instinct. That day in the fire, Ash hadn't just saved himself. He had led Jack to lives that would have been lost. There was purpose in the bobcat's actions, intelligence in those golden eyes. To the city, Ash was a risk. To Jack, Ash was proof that wildness and humanity could stand side by side in the face of disaster. Pushed to the edge, Jack made a decision. No more hiding. No more reacting in fear to every rumor or knock at the door. He needed a new approach, one that would protect Ash, honor what they'd accomplished, and maybe, just maybe, shift the conversation in the city from scandal to possibility. He spent long nights researching, combing through animal partnership laws, firehouse history, and wildlife rehabilitation programs. He compiled stories of rescue dogs, search horses, even therapy animals who'd worked alongside humans in crises. He drafted letters, filled out forms, called city offices and animal welfare organizations, proposing something new: official registration of Ash as an animal partner. Not a pet, not a mascot, but a working partner trained to assist in search and rescue. The idea met instant resistance. His colleagues snickered behind his back. "Next, you'll be bringing in a wolf, Cap," one joked, loud enough for the whole bunkroom to hear. Reporters hounded him, twisting his words, framing him as a reckless maverick putting the city at risk. Wildlife officials threatened fines, court dates, even criminal charges. Every bureaucratic door slammed shut in his face. The more he argued Ash's case, the more entrenched the opposition became. Yet Jack refused to yield. He understood, finally, that this wasn't just about one bobcat. It was about the way the city drew hard lines between wild and tame, between chaos and order. It was about the stubborn belief that nature could only be feared, fenced off, or destroyed, not understood or embraced. He started keeping a journal, notes on Ash's behaviors, sketches of how the bobcat responded to sights, sounds, and people. He recorded patterns, the way Ash listened for distress calls, reacted to smoke, even the unique path the cat took through rubble, sometimes discovering things the crew would have missed. The more he studied Ash, the more he realized that the bobcat's instincts could be guided, not commanded, harnessed as a force for good, if he could only find the right approach. Still, every step forward felt like moving through deepening snow. The city's anger grew. The firehouse, once his second home, became a crucible of doubt. Jack felt the weight of every glance, every news article, every official warning, pressing him to give up. But in the darkest hours of the night, when the city was quiet and Ash curled beside his boots, Jack made a silent promise. He would not let fear or ignorance dictate the end of this story. He would fight for Ash, for what they had become together, even if it meant risking everything he had built. From that moment, Jack stopped just reacting. He set his sights on proving, through action, through courage, through every hard-earned lesson, that humanity and the wild could stand together in the heart of the city and do something no one thought possible. Jack Turner knew he couldn't win this battle with speeches or paperwork alone. If he was going to change minds, his own crews, the cities, maybe even the law, he'd need to show them what Ash could truly do. He began to work quietly, long before sunrise and long after the city's chatter faded to a hush. When the station was empty or the night shift was too busy playing cards to notice, Jack would open the old service door that led to the firehouse courtyard and whistle low, a note carried only by habit and hope. Ash would appear out of the shadows, fur rippling, ears perked and alert, eyes always scanning for trouble or opportunity. Jack started to train Ash, not in the way you'd train a dog with treats and commands, but by watching, learning, and gently shaping the bobcat's natural instincts. He hid objects in the snow, letting Ash sniff them out, then moved on to the more subtle signals. Distress sounds, the scent of burnt fabric, the faint high whine of an alarm. Ash learned by watching Jack, shadowing him through drills. Sometimes the bobcat's instincts were faster than any training, leaping ahead to sniff out a hidden rag or follow the sound of muffled coughing behind a closed door. Progress was slow, and setbacks frequent. Ash would disappear for hours, returning muddy and wild-eyed, sometimes dragging bits of garbage or a half-eaten rat. On more than one occasion, Jack found the cat prowling the locker room, spooking rookies or shredding another battered towel. There were tense moments, close calls when Ash nearly bolted out an open door, or when city inspectors showed up unannounced and Jack had to hide the bobcat in a dusty supply closet, heart hammering in his chest. Through it all, Jack kept meticulous notes. He mapped out patterns, charted Ash's strengths and quirks. The more he observed, the more he understood that partnership was not about control, but about trust, allowing wildness to shape the rules as much as the rules shaped wildness. He let Ash lead the way, following the bobcat's nose through obstacle courses of stacked crates, old hoses, and simulated disaster zones set up in the firehouse basement. When Ash succeeded, Jack offered a quiet nod, sometimes a scrap of chicken. When the bobcat failed, he simply reset and tried again, refusing to break the fragile bond they'd built. Then, disaster struck. One afternoon, as the city rumbled with the restlessness of approaching summer, a gas main ruptured on the south side, turning a sleepy block into an explosion of fire and chaos. The shockwave rattled windows as far away as the loop. Flames tore through 2 buildings, sending smoke billowing for miles, painting the skyline with a jagged black wound. Jack heard the call come over the radio, his gut twisting. This was the kind of catastrophe where seconds meant lives. Arriving on scene, Station 27 faced a nightmare. Fire rolling through brick walls, Stairwells collapsed, frightened voices echoing from somewhere deep within the haze. Smoke crawled into every crevice. The temperature inside was suffocating, each breath a struggle. Jack organized his team, assigned search grids, but he couldn't shake the memory of Ash's uncanny ability to sense life where others only saw chaos. Against every rule, he opened the back door of the truck and whistled. Ash leapt down, paws silent on the hot asphalt, every muscle coiled with anticipation. Jack hesitated for a heartbeat, knowing the risk, feeling the stares of his crew and the judging eyes of officials on the edge of the cordon. But desperation breeds courage, and as the siren screamed, Jack gave a silent signal. Ash darted into the smoky ruin, disappearing almost instantly. For a moment, Jack's resolve faltered. Had he done the right thing? Would Ash run, vanish, revert to the wild for good? Or would the bobcat's wildness find what their equipment and experience could not? Minutes dragged. The radios sputtered, search teams called out, and the city's fear mounted as word spread. A child was missing, last seen on the top floor, now collapsed into a labyrinth of smoke and debris. Jack's stomach twisted as he scanned the building, searching for any sign, any movement. He forced himself to focus on the job, directing crews, checking escape routes, but part of him listened only for the wild, piercing cry he had come to know so well. Then, from deep within the smoke, the sound came, a raw, haunting scream, unmistakable in its urgency. The crews froze, searching for the source, startled by the primal call slicing through the inferno. Jack's heart pounded as he dashed forward, following the cry, trusting that bond forged in frost and fire. He scrambled over splintered beams, smoke burning his eyes, hands shaking with fear and hope. Ash's voice echoed again, nearer this time, guiding him through the wreckage. The bobcat had found something. Every step deeper into the choking darkness was a gamble, a bet on instinct, trust, and everything Jack had learned about courage on the edge of what's possible. The world seemed to narrow to the sound of Ash's cry and the heat of the flames as Jack pressed forward, refusing to let doubt or fear break the fragile line between wild and human that held them together. Jack plunged into the smoke-thick hallway, vision narrowing to the wobbling circle of his flashlight and the desperate echoes of Ash's cry. Debris tumbled around him, the floor a tangled maze of ruined beams, glass, and blackened brick. Each breath tasted like metal and panic. The fire had warped the old apartment building beyond recognition. Ceilings sagged, walls peeled, and every step threatened to give way beneath his boots. But ahead, somewhere close, the bobcat's cry rose again, shrill and urgent, a beacon in the chaos. He followed, every muscle screaming for caution, even as adrenaline pushed him onward. The world shrank to a tunnel of smoke and sound. Jack scrambled over a collapsed bookcase, feeling the heat lick at his gear, and caught a glimpse of movement. Low, quick, and wild. Ash darted from the shadows, fur streaked with soot, paws slipping in the puddles that pooled on the scorched linoleum. For a split second, their eyes met. Ash's gold gaze burned with a wild intelligence, fierce and steady, as if the bobcat knew exactly what was at stake. In the wreckage of a ruined hallway, Jack finally saw what Ash had found. A small child, no older than 7, wedged between a fallen pipe and a wall, coughing weakly in the choking air. The child's face was streaked with grime, eyes wide and unfocused, but alive. Miraculously, stubbornly alive. Ash stood guard, tail bristling, growling low at the shifting beams above, every hair standing on end as danger crept close over. Jack didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the searing heat biting at his skin. He slipped an arm under the child's shoulders, murmuring a steady stream of encouragement, voice almost lost in the roar of the collapsing structure. With the other hand, he waved for Ash, trusting the bobcat's wild senses to find the safest path out. Together they crawled through the debris, Jack half dragging the child, Ash moving ahead and then pausing, checking the air, pacing impatiently whenever Jack slowed. Above them, the groan of twisting steel signaled imminent collapse. Plaster rained down. Flames licked at the doorframes. In the growing cacophony, Jack heard the rest of his team shouting, distant, frantic, but unable to reach this pocket of the inferno. He bit down on fear, focused on the rhythm of movement. Reach, pull, crawl, breathe. Ash circled back, bumping Jack's arm with a muddy nose, guiding him around a heap of fallen bricks, then dashing ahead to scout another path. They reached a narrow stairwell, half choked with debris, but open to a shaft of gray daylight. Jack gathered his last reserves of strength, hoisted the child higher, and pressed forward, muscles trembling. Ash bounded ahead, yowling a warning as a burning beam crashed behind them, sending sparks skittering like fireflies across the ruined floor. For a moment, Jack dared to believe they would all make it. But at the landing, disaster struck. As Jack maneuvered the child through a jagged gap, a support beam above gave way with a teeth-rattling crack. Jack shoved the child clear, twisting his own body to shield them from the worst of the impact, but Ash, caught in the narrow stairwell, was pinned beneath a chunk of splintered timber. The bobcat's scream was raw, animal, cut through with pain and fury. Time slowed. Jack stared at Ash, caught in a snarl of shattered wood and rubble, paws thrashing. Smoke thickened around them, and the floor buckled, threatening to collapse entirely. He had to choose right then and there with the world on fire. Save the child, or save the bobcat who'd led him here, who had become his partner, his hope, his living proof that wildness could be an ally. Jack's training took over. He cradled the child, lifted them high, and raced for the last patch of daylight, coughing, stumbling, refusing to look back even as Ash's screams followed him. He barreled through the doorway, into the arms of waiting medics and firefighters who snatched the child from his grip and swept them into an ambulance. For one agonizing heartbeat, Jack almost turned back. The memory of Ash, fierce and small, snarling at danger, flashed through his mind. Then, from the ruined stairwell, came a final desperate sound, a scrabbling, tearing noise, then a blur of movement as Ash clawed free at the last possible second, squeezing through the debris as the upper floor crashed down in a hail of sparks. Ash bolted past the stunned crowd, vanishing into the smoke and chaos, battered but alive. Jack slumped to the curb, lungs heaving, clothes scorched, every nerve on fire. Around him, sirens wailed, the child sobbed, and the world blurred into the endless noise of survival and loss. But as the medics tended his burns and the crew clapped his shoulder, Jack's gaze searched the smoky distance, looking for a flash of gold, a low shadow, a wild friend who'd risked everything for a stranger's life. He had made his choice, and somehow, against all odds, both wild and human had survived the flames together. The fire was out, but the echoes lingered. In the hours that followed, the city block where the explosion had leveled homes became a landscape of char and loss. First responders moved like ghosts through the ruins, searching for survivors, gathering what little could be salvaged. Reporters prowled the edges, notebooks out, cameras hungry for heroes and heartbreak. It was the kind of disaster that Chicago would remember for years, and this time, Jack Turner and a wild bobcat were at the center of it all. Jack spent the night in the ER, skin blistered and raw where the flames had reached through his gear. His hair was singed, hands trembling as the nurses cleaned and bandaged the burns. He didn't talk much, only nodded when asked for his name, watched the door for a sign of Ash, and flinched at every radio call from Station 27. The staff recognized him from the news and asked about the bobcat. Jack only shook his head, the memory of Ash's scream echoing in his ears. Had the animal escaped? Was it alive or crushed beneath the rubble? The uncertainty gnawed at him, sharp as the pain in his shoulders. He was discharged at dawn, limping back to the firehouse in a haze of exhaustion. The building felt different. Every glance from his fellow firefighters was loaded with questions or admiration, some with suspicion. Word had already spread about what had happened in the burning wreck, that it was the bobcat who'd found the missing child, the bobcat who'd vanished into the flames. Survivors came by with plates of cookies and handwritten cards. Strangers left flowers at the station steps. But Jack barely noticed. All he wanted was news of Ash. That afternoon, as the city's cleanup machines chewed through rubble, a call came from animal control. Someone had spotted a bobcat, limping along the riverbank, fur matted and bloody. Jack barely hesitated. Ignoring the warnings of his doctors, he raced to the river on foot, scanning the brush and driftwood for a flash of gold. There, tangled in reeds, was Ash, alive, but battered. One paw was mangled, claws torn and bleeding, and the animal's eyes were glazed with pain. Jack approached slowly, letting Ash recognize his scent, murmuring soft nonsense just to keep the wild heartbeat steady. He carried Ash back to the firehouse bundled in his jacket, ignoring the looks from passers-by. Inside, he laid the bobcat on a blanket, cleaning wounds with trembling hands. Ash was too tired to protest, too wounded to fight, only shivering as Jack bandaged the ruined paw. They spent the night that way, man and wild creature, both marked by the fire, bound now by scars as much as by loyalty. In the days that followed, the city weighed its judgment. Jack was summoned before a disciplinary board, accused of reckless endangerment, of using a wild animal during a rescue, of violating city and wildlife laws. There were heated debates in City Hall, TV debates, editorials both praising and condemning his actions. Some called him a visionary, arguing that Ash had done what no human or search dog could have. Others insisted he was a dangerous rule breaker, a man who'd gambled with public safety for the sake of his own beliefs. For a while, it seemed certain that Jack would lose everything. He was suspended from duty, stripped of his command at Station 27, while the city conducted its investigation. His colleagues split, some openly supporting him, others keeping their distance, wary of being caught in the fallout. Jack kept to himself, spending his days tending Ash's wounds, his nights replaying every moment in the burning building, wondering what more he could have done. But the survivors, the family Ash had saved, the child who'd been pulled from the smoke, came forward. They told their stories on local news, their voices trembling with gratitude. "Without that bobcat," one said, "we'd be dead. Captain Turner risked everything to save us." Slowly, the tide of public opinion shifted. Letters poured in from animal lovers, firefighters from other cities, and even a few wildlife experts who'd watched the news and saw in Ash not just a danger, but a bridge, a sign that sometimes the wild could be an ally. Still, there was a price. Ash's paw would never fully heal. The animal limped, claws permanently damaged from where they'd caught and ripped in the rubble. The city ruled that Ash could not remain at Station 27. Animal control officers arrived with tranquilizer darts and a transport cage, intent on relocating the bobcat to a sanctuary outside the city. Jack stood by helplessly, heart pounding, as they coaxed Ash into the cage, the wild eyes never leaving his for a second. When the door clanged shut, Jack felt the weight of everything he'd risked settle in his chest. He had nearly lost his career. Ash had nearly lost her freedom, and more. Both bore scars that would never truly fade. Yet in those long, empty nights, as snow drifted again through the streets, Jack realized they had also changed something fundamental in the city's heart. Chicago wasn't sure what to make of its new heroes. But one thing was certain: neither Jack nor Ash would ever be forgotten. 1 year slipped by in Chicago, marked by the passage of seasons and the slow healing of wounds. The city's scars, on bricks, on streets, on memory, faded beneath new paint, rebuilt porches, laughter on stoops. But some scars, the ones on people and in hearts, lasted longer. For Jack Turner, time moved in odd fits and starts. His burns knit into shiny pink patches on his skin. The pain dulled but ever present. The echo of fire lived beneath the surface of his days, a constant reminder of what had been gained and what had been lost. Station 27 moved on too. Jack returned to duty, not as captain, but as a firefighter among firefighters, a quiet presence in the back row of morning roll calls, still respected but somehow apart. The city had rescinded his suspension, but not his notoriety. Some called him a hero, others a fool. The men and women who'd once laughed with him now offered brief nods or awkward silences, unsure how to bridge the distance created by headlines, hearings, and the wild. The biggest change, though, was the absence of Ash. The firehouse felt emptier. In quiet moments, Jack found himself listening for the scratch of claws, the wild thump of paws leaping to a windowsill, the fierce, low growl echoing in the stairwell. The sanctuary outside the city sent updates. Ash was alive, if wary. The paw would never fully heal, but the bobcat adapted, hunting rabbits in open fields, roaming the fenced forests with the stubborn pride of a creature that had defied the odds. Yet, as winter deepened and snow returned to Chicago, stories began to spread. First among the firehouse crew, then across neighborhoods where tragedy had struck. People swore they'd glimpsed a wild animal at the edge of the city, something bigger than a stray cat, quick as a rumor. Sometimes, during blizzards, firefighters responded to calls in the dead of night and found the snow outside a burning home marked with the prints of a bobcat. On more than one occasion, search teams spoke of a shadow slipping through the smoke, leading them, by instinct or miracle, to survivors trapped in collapsed buildings or flooded basements. The tales multiplied, blurring the line between truth and legend. Some said Ash had returned to claim Chicago as her territory. Others whispered that the bobcat had become a guardian spirit, a silent ally who appeared only when the city's need was greatest. Jack knew better than to believe in myths. But when the radio crackled with emergencies on icy nights, and he glimpsed a flash of gold eyes in the darkness, he let himself hope. Then, one bitter January night, Station 27 caught the call. Warehouse collapse, possible entrapment, sub-zero wind chill. Jack rode out with his crew, heart racing as memories flooded back. They arrived to chaos, searchlights slicing through the blowing snow, paramedics shouting, heavy machinery rumbling. Somewhere inside the wreck, someone was alive, pinned by beams no man could lift alone. As Jack organized the search, he paused, squinting into the swirling white. At the far edge of the scene, perched atop a mound of snow-covered debris, sat a familiar silhouette, tail twitching, ears pricked, eyes glowing with a wild fire. Ash. For a heartbeat, time spun backward, and Jack was just a man on the edge of a storm, heart caught between duty and wonder. Ash dropped from her perch and vanished into the maze of broken timbers. Jack followed, heart thundering, trusting the bond that had once saved lives and cost so much. Ash wove through the ruin, pausing to sniff the air, doubling back until she halted beside a collapsed shelf. There, Jack heard it, the faint, desperate tapping of a trapped worker's hand against a pipe. He shouted for help. The crew swarmed, and together they dug the man free, alive and shivering. When Jack turned, Ash was already slipping away, her limp barely noticeable as she bounded over the rubble, leaving nothing but paw prints and a memory. For days afterward, rumors spread. The story landed in the paper again, and once more, debate sparked citywide. Was it really the same bobcat? Or just wishful thinking, a ghost story for cold nights? But Jack knew the truth, as did the growing number of firefighters who began to leave scraps of food near their stations, just in case. Ash became more than an animal, more than a hero. She became a symbol. She was proof that wildness, when respected, could become an ally, that the city's hard edges could soften just enough to let something untamed in. Jack found a strange peace in this new normal. He didn't own Ash. He didn't need to. Their bond had been forged by fire, tempered by loss, and sealed by mutual respect. Sometimes on his way home from the station, Jack would detour past the riverbank or the edge of the industrial yards, scanning for golden eyes in the twilight. He rarely saw her, but once on a snow-bright night, he glimpsed her atop a distant fence looking back at him for a single electric moment before disappearing into the dark. The lesson lingered, long after the headlines faded. Jack spoke of it quietly, to new recruits and old friends alike. You can't own the wild. But if you respect it, truly respect it, sometimes it will stand with you when you need it most. And that, in a city built on steel and fire, was the truest kind of miracle. Snow fell quietly on Chicago, muffling the clang of traffic and the distant shouts that echoed through the city's steel canyons. For once, everything felt peaceful, a hush that stretched from the river's frozen edge to the rooftops of Station 27. The firehouse stood watch as it always had, red doors bright beneath strings of holiday lights, windows glowing in the early dusk. But this year, the mood was different, changed by a story that had traveled from whispered rumor to headline, from private risk to public legend. Inside the station, Jack Turner moved with a steadiness that came from scars both visible and hidden. He'd grown older, leaner, the lines at the corners of his eyes etched deeper by nights of smoke and loss and wonder. There were still moments when he caught himself listening for the familiar thump of paws in the hallway, or the soft growl from the storage room door. Ash's absence was a presence in itself, woven into the fabric of the firehouse, a reminder that some partnerships outlive their time together. Yet that winter, a new tradition had taken root among the crew. On the coldest nights, someone would leave a plate of chicken by the back door, just in case. Sometimes, in the blue half-light before dawn, footprints appeared in the fresh snow, distinctive, wider than a house cat's, crossing the courtyard before vanishing into the city's tangle of alleys and train yards. No one ever said the name aloud, but everyone felt it. A trace of wildness still belonged to them, watching, waiting, perhaps even guarding from afar. It was during one of those snowy evenings, as a gentle flurry blurred the city's hard edges, that Station 27 was called to a fire on the north side, a small blaze, quickly contained. As the crew rolled hoses and checked their gear beneath the swirling flakes, a commotion gathered outside. Children had crowded the sidewalk, eyes wide, faces red with cold. One pointed toward the fire truck, shouting. And there, perched bold as a legend on the gleaming hood, was Ash. She sat regal and calm, her winter coat bristling, amber eyes reflecting the streetlights. For a long moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Firefighters, children, and neighbors stared, uncertain whether to approach or simply marvel. Ash made no move to run. She seemed to belong, a living symbol of everything untamed and resilient about the city, about life itself. Jack stepped forward, boots crunching in the snow. He didn't reach out. He simply stood, a few feet away, meeting her gaze. In Ash's eyes he saw the old fierceness, but also something softer. Trust, maybe, or the echo of every life they'd touched together. Around them, the city pulsed with stories, of families saved, of courage rediscovered, of a wild creature who'd refused to let the world decide her fate. As quietly as she'd come, Ash leapt from the truck and vanished into the gathering dusk, leaving only paw prints and wonder behind. The children cheered. The crew exchanged looks that mixed disbelief with pride. And for a moment, the city felt smaller, bound together by a story too true for fiction and too wild for rules. Jack never tried to find Ash again. Not really. He understood now that love for the wild isn't about possession, but about respect and faith. In the months that followed, more sightings trickled in. Here a glimpse by the river, there a shadow in a snowstorm, always at the edge of catastrophe or hope. Other stations claimed their own visits, and sometimes, late at night, a bobcat's yowl would echo across frozen rooftops, stirring old dreams in old hearts. News crews tried to chase the story, but the city had already adopted its own ending. Murals appeared in schoolyards, a bobcat beside a fire truck, smoke and snow swirling in the background. Teachers spoke of Ash when they talked about resilience, survival, and the importance of seeing value in every life, no matter how wild or fragile. For many, Ash had become a legend. But for those who'd watched her work, who'd trusted her nose and her courage to, she was proof that hope could arrive in the most unexpected form. Jack, for his part, found peace in the knowledge that he'd done right by Ash, by the city, and by his own stubborn heart. He had bent the rules, risked everything, and paid a steep price. But in return, he'd helped rewrite the boundaries between man and nature, showing that compassion and courage are not opposites, but allies. In the end, Ash remained, part wild, part guardian, all spirit. The city was never the same. On winter nights, people still pause by the firehouse and wonder what they would do, faced with a life teetering between survival and oblivion. They ask themselves the question that now lives in the heart of Chicago's folklore. If you found a dying wild animal on the street, would you save it or let nature decide? And as the snow drifts down, covering paw prints and memories alike, hope lingers on the edge of every answer, wild and untamed as the city itself.